Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jerry Handley here, Viking Performance Training, with my good friend Jonathan Pishner of Apex Counseling, and welcome to today's episode of Asymmetric Habits. It only took us 2 years almost, but we have an official name. So, yes. So today we're talking about a topic that when we came up with this about a month and a half ago, we were both thinking, "Oh, this is going to be good." Like a lot of people need to hear this, and it is focusing on providing help to all the caregivers out there. There's professional caregivers, but of course, there's also so many of us become caregivers in just our own personal lives, whether it be helping older family members, parents, siblings, you name it. It's just so many people in those types of situations. And while there's of course similarities to being a professional in that case, there's also a lot of things that are just going to be unique to the more family dynamic of caregiving. So we do want to focus a lot on that because again, as a situation almost like so many of us will end up in, but none of us are necessarily trained to do. So I think this can also just help a lot of people really navigate that part of their life and provide the best care possible while also taking care of themselves the best way that they can. So JP, get
Yeah,
into it, man.
yeah. So we ended up talking about this because we just through the nature of our jobs and through life have exposure to a lot of people who are in caregiver roles. We've both been in caregiver roles in some form or fashion. And one of the things, since we focus so hard on like habits that will provide benefit, through small changes that give big benefits. One of the things that happens to an awful lot of people, since they have no training in being a caregiver, unless they're very, very fortunate, they get thrust into this role and they really are just kind of building their habits around it as they go. And sadly, there's not a lot of good information for how to be a caregiver to, say, a family member who has a medical condition or a parent who's just like struggling with old age and is struggling with more limited abilities. So, we wanted to provide some ideas around that because it's so likely that each person listening to this is going to end up in that scenario at some point. And if you're going to end up in it, or you have a high likelihood of ending up in it, you got to at least have a few things to do just to keep yourself sane. Because caregiving is a very challenging role to be in, even if you are well trained, and even if you are like just you happen to have a talent for that. And most people don't have both of those advantages.
Mhm.
So if we think of like places to start, uh, I'm going to notice, here in a second, but Jerry, I'm going to ask you, like, what's some of the stuff you notice that, like, people really struggle with? Like, what are the fail points of being a caregiver that you have gotten to observe personally? And then I'll say some of mine.
I think the biggest one is um, not being adaptable enough in approach or mentality. Like I feel like a lot of people tend to default to a certain style of caregiving that they think will be the best, but like we're talking here, isn't necessarily going to be the great in every situation or with every person. But then they don't change, they won't shift it. They just keep trying to do that method harder or more. And like, specifically, I mean, I feel like there's a, large section of people who take the very like, always be positive approach, just like everything, like, I mean, just everything is positive. Let's always look on the bright side, but, are always saying that to the person.
What's that phrase? Positive vibes only or something? Is that,
Yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like
exactly. Like
yeah, that's what it
there's
is.
that type. And then on the other hand, there's also the type who's like, there's a strong subsection of very regimented people. These are usually people who maybe found that the routine of giving care to somebody was manageable once they figured that out, once they got quote unquote figured out a basic routine. But when things change, they tend to go into more of a panic. Because it's something different. They don't know what to do. Like different is bad. Those are like the biggest things that I tend to see, or people tend to be stuck in one of those and just don't really have the ability to look at it from other perspectives to kind of decide what to do, maybe more or less, or when to take a different approach.
Well, yeah, and I'm so glad you said that because I hadn't even planned necessarily to bring that up. We've talked about how if you've known a thing for a long time, you sometimes forget other people don't know the thing. Uh, I vary up my caregiving approach in counseling so much, I kind of forgot that other people don't know that's a thing you can do and
Yeah,
have to do. So I'm actually really glad you brought that up. For me, I think the thing I notice people failing a lot around and really giving themselves a hard time with is not taking as good a care of themselves as the caregiver that they could.
huge. Yep.
And what's so interesting about that is we easily fall into some of these spoken or unspoken societal myths, and I don't really never get a lot of thought to where it comes from. But boy, I tell you what, when I talk to people who give care for anyone, whether they're a doctor or they're helping a family member or they're a parent, somewhere along the way, we came up with this idea that you must always, always, always put the person you're caring for first with no exceptions or limitations or anything.
Yep.
And in a way that's almost crazy. But boy, we sure bought into that somewhere along the way. I
And
don't know where it was, but
that's
that
all
showed
over.
up.
Yeah, yeah, you see that everywhere, and to make it worse, the people who fall into that, like who've bought into that, are almost always the people who are going to. They are the ones who are going to do more for other people.
Mhm.
They feel like it's like they start feeling like it's something wrong if they don't, if they're not focusing, sacrificing for other people rather than themselves first. And but the people who aren't like who haven't gone that way are much more likely to take advantage of those people. Like sometimes too. So I mean, not everybody, but I mean, if you're on the other side and you're more of a take type of person, you just not particularly empathetic or give a whole lot. That's a really was not it's parasitic. That's a very parasitic relationship there. It's people who feel like they always need to give of themselves, combined with people who feel like they'll just keep taking.
Yeah, which hopefully the person you're caring for is not a taker, but that happens sometimes.
Right. Right. But yeah, I
So,
thought about that. So that's a good one though. That's because that's a huge part of it is not taking care of yourself.
mhm. And so let's start with that one because that one if that one fails, you can't even do all the rest of them. You can't vary your style of caregiving. You can't have compassion for somebody if you don't take care of yourself. The whole rest of it falls apart. So I think that's the part where we got to start,
So
right?
true. Yeah, yeah, that's the foundation. That is the foundation. And I come across this a lot for the strength and conditioning
So
training side.
one of the things there's kind of a thought question I love asking of people, and it at least puts a crack in that myth. Because let's pretend for a second that you had to have surgery, right? Uh, and you got to pick between two surgeons. Do you want the one who works 16-hour days and never gets to take any time off and see his family, never goes on vacation, and is always just running his ass off and stressed and always short on sleep and bad on nutrition and just never is caught up? Do you want that surgeon, or do you want the one that just got back from the Bahamas and is rested and relaxed and like works some, sees his family some, and has a balanced life? Like, I mean, if you gotta have somebody slice you open and like take care of you, which surgeon you want, man?
Man, that is an awesome question. Yeah, definitely the more relaxed one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like I don't want surgeon A. Matter of fact, I'd rather have surgeon B or nobody. Like I don't even want the first dude to touch me or even look at me. Because we can't even predict what that care is going to look like, and yet we let ourselves get into these places where that's exactly what our life looks like, and then we imagine that we're somehow giving good care to someone.
I think what happens too is I do believe that there is a pretty sizable shift in society now in terms of seeing a little bit more about, or at least seeing or understanding the theory of self-care, of taking care of yourself and that being related to the way other things happen in your life.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like I feel like it's more external, like more like looking through a window. I feel like people see through like looking at other people going like, "Oh yeah, this person's got their life together more, or this person started taking care of themselves and other things improved." But I can't do that. I feel like that's still huge in society now too, is like we're good at it looking outside through a window at somebody else, but when we turn and look at the mirror, we suddenly feel like it's going to be different. And when like we're the exception to the rule.
Mhm.
Like we can't I can't take care of myself because of blank, 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 blank. Insert all these responsibilities. And like that's where so many people struggle. So what can we do to help those people? What's something we can tell those people right now?
So people know self-care exists, but one thing we have not yet gotten good at, although you're right, there's a shift and people are starting to maybe believe, but one of the things that people are still having trouble with is they lump self-care into the category of some sort of reward or luxury or something like that. And the thing about it being a reward is it's very easy to make up the idea that you haven't done enough to earn it.
Yes, that right there, earning it is the biggest thing that I see, and people feeling like they haven't.
And in a way, I kind of like that there's a few little things that I wish we could just bring to everybody. So like um, it's not quite said so explicitly, but part of the counselor ethics code does mention that it's a counselor's obligation to take care of themselves in service of making sure that they're fully prepared to help others. And in the state of West Virginia, the counselor ethics code is functionally law. Uh, so you can make an argument, perhaps a tenuous one, but certainly the pathways there. You can make an argument. I'm legally obligated to take care of myself properly because I'm a professional caregiver, and that's how I make my money. And in service to society, like the code says, you have to take care of yourself. It's not optional. But most people get introduced to the idea of self care as if it's a reward and as if you have to do something to earn it. Um, I loved this line. I can't remember for the life of me where I heard it, some podcast somewhere. But somebody said, "Wine is a grocery, not a luxury." And I really wish we could bring that to anything that is involved with self care. Like this is not a luxury. This is just part of the bill. Like you actually got to just do this.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome about it almost being part of the code for counselors. More stuff should definitely do that, especially if it does involve any form of like healthcare, physical or mental. I feel like that'd be great. Um,
Mhm.
without wanting to go too deep into it, a part of this big issue that so many of us struggle with, this idea of taking care of ourselves first, is when we start out younger, we have, like we talked about several times, we have more options and it's easier to do stuff for us because we have less
Mhm.
responsibilities. But then as you get older, as you go through higher levels of school, getting a job, starting a family, whatever, it is constantly a practice of grabbing more responsibilities, more things we do, and almost always like getting rid of the things that we did for ourselves to make room for that until we end up these amazingly unbalanced human beings. And so that's the way so many of us have built things up. So especially when it's something as important as caring for somebody else, it's this idea of like, how can I possibly worry about myself if there's something I can do or need to do for this person and to help them. And again, like it's taken completely blanket surface statement that sounds like a very noble thought. Like I will take care of others no matter what the cost. Like that's a super noble thought. But then, just like you said earlier, is like how long can you really do that? Like both quality and longevity of care for other people will suffer if you yourself start to suffer. Like, and it's funny because you gave the thought question. I'm the numbers guy. I'll give a numbers one. So when you're feeling amazing, you can maybe routinely give these people 90 to 100% of just like your attention and quality when you're giving them that care. If you are taking care of yourself, you're well balanced, like you said, you're still making sure you're healthy and doing things that you need. But if you get run down, stressed, you start unhealthier habits, you start losing sleep, everything that you mentioned, and just letting stress get you, you might be running at 60% or something like that for a while. And so even if you're giving that person 100%, it is nowhere as good as even 80% would have been before. Like, I mean, you were again like literally breaking down, tearing down your own ability to care for other people by not taking care of yourself.
Yeah. And to be honest, most people imagine that self-care is some kind of like deep time commitment, like you have to take 2-hour bubble baths and all this weird stuff. Like most of the time, you can actually do it with relatively small time investments. Like
Mhm.
uh, you know, 15-minute breaks just from what you're doing, just to like kind of space out and veg out, pays dividends. Getting to bed an hour earlier pays dividends. Eating real food instead of like whatever you get through the drive-through. There's dozens upon dozens of ways you can actually do little self-care before you even worry about big stuff. Like self-care isn't necessarily 2-week long cruises, on a cruise line. A lot of times it's just 5 minutes here, 15 minutes there that just adds up.
Yeah. And, something that actually came up in with another group that I happened to be talking to just a few weeks ago, um, that I think would actually be very helpful here is we tend to work but like people are resistant to change and we don't necessarily like making a lot of changes or having to make changes over and over again. The more changes you can almost wrap up into one action, easier it is. I mean, as long as they as long as they're applicable to each other. But let's say you get no physical activity, or like you said, with the meal prep. Let's use either one of those. So, adding that 15-minute walk, like, can you actually do some errands for the person and maybe string them together so you get more walking in? Or with the food prep or like with something like that, is there maybe there's a time frame that you're watching an elderly parent that it's kind of a slower time, you're just there to make sure they don't need anything. Maybe you can use that time to prepare some healthier meals so it's not just being there and then rushing to McDonald's on the way back. Like,
That's the kind of idea that does sound good on paper. I would say a lot of people would struggle with that. Most people actually kind of need to overcorrect into not doing that and then come back to that.
that
Because
makes
what will happen to a lot of people, if they're already struggling with the thing we're talking about, they will get way too into, okay, how do I make my self-care productive, which is destructive to this idea. Uh, that's not a bad place to end up. It will work, but most people can't start there.
that makes
That
sense.
would be a
Yeah.
struggle.
Mhm. That's a great point. So when we're actually looking at caring for people, so much of this keeps coming back to mindset. The self care part, I mean, was a part of mindset, like thinking about giving yourself the permission to think about yourself to other people. But then the other part, I feel like I mentioned earlier, is in the messaging we're giving to the people we're caring for. And like I had said, this is where I feel like a lot of people stick to one message, even when that one message may not like be the best one, or they want it like I mentioned, some people want to be very, very, very positive. The glass is half full all the time to the point of being too much. Some people want to be
That is starting to be called toxic positivity.
yes. Some people outright, again, like anything different, especially if it's things they've already struggled with or like that, they struggle with that. Any change is bad and they may panic. which may also create problems. So like, if you're passing on those feelings, because in both cases, I'm talking about you're basically giving those feelings off into the person you're caring for. So, and we know this, like, I don't want to go on too long, but the person being cared for can pick up when your positivity is starting to go way off, and it's like, okay, like, this, I do not feel like this is realistic anymore. And like you said, like, that's when it can start getting negative, or at least lose effectiveness. On the other hand, if you're panicking, what do you think the person you're caring for is thinking? If you're freaking out about all these things, it's like probably not very good things. It's like, so I think that's what
So,
struggle.
one of the things that's so hard, and this is going to be tricky for me to give any tips on, because no matter what, it's going to sound like you almost have to have counselor level skill in certain things. Uh, but part of it is it's hard to listen effectively in certain areas. So, like, let's imagine for a second, somebody has to act as a caregiver, and they already have a billion things in their head, not only from their own life, but having to take on this role and just everything. One of the things that becomes a struggle is hearing the person they're caring for. And what ends up happening, especially, this is so much worse with invisible types of disorders and difficulties. Uh, but what happens a lot is they imagine, the caregiver imagines that however they solved some previous problem, that's the useful thing to deliver to the person they're caring for. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes it's very good. But let's do a specific one, because I got to learn about this not so long ago. Uh, so chronic pain. I didn't realize until having had it that musculoskeletal pain is different than nerve pain.
Mm.
It lives in completely different areas of the brain. It has a completely different prioritization process for the nervous system. Uh, and hopefully I never did this, but I very well could have. I may very well have like given people advice for like, man, well, if you're having pain, just do this, having no clue that I had a completely different situation than they did. Uh, and happily, I was taught to listen through my schooling. So I know in a counseling role, I've never done that, but like I had heard a lot, like, okay, nerve pain seems to really impact people differently. And so I knew to think about it a little differently. But boy, when I had it, I learned exactly how much I didn't know about that. One of the things that happens to a lot of caregivers is that they lovingly try to put themselves in the person's shoes and say, well, okay, let me give you this solution that I use to solve something, when in fact you're probably needing to try and listen and construct their experience much more clearly to the extent that you're able. And like I said, here's the part where I'm almost saying like, okay, be a counselor. uh, but even if you can just figure out like, oh, this seems to be different than that other problem I've solved, maybe the thing I'm delivering isn't as useful. Can I think through, are there other things maybe I can suggest, deliver, some other way of being with them? I hope I'm saying this in a way that makes sense. Like I feel like I'm not explaining this particularly well. Does this make sense?
No, I think for sure. I think this is
Okay.
very valuable, especially what you were talking about earlier. Like, I think this is huge for people, especially not putting themselves in the same shoes that they were in before, or thinking that the person you're caring for is in your shoes. I said that.
Yeah.
Thinking of yourself as being in that person, and just
Yeah.
basing it on the past. Because yeah, 'cause so many of the things we do is based on what we, just like you said, we found or we think works from before, but it's so different when it's somebody else, and especially if if it's a different situation entirely. So I think a big part of that is, one of the biggest thing I'm picking up is before before you're about to have any change, caring for somebody, is to stop. and really just almost take a second to think if there's anything different that you might be missing or anything like that. Like, am I being, especially in the case of something of a pickup, like it's not just simply watching somebody, but something has actually happened or they actually need your care right now. It's like
Mhm.
before you give them a highly positive or a highly negative reaction, stop and think for a second, just like what actually seems to be happening. And in pretty much every case, being calm about it is going to help you out as well as the person you're caring for.
Yeah, almost certainly. There's very few scenarios where getting into an argument or being forceful with somebody that you're in a caregiving role for is going to be useful. Asterisk. There are exceptions to that, but that requires a level of skill that I could not possibly train somebody in, even if I had 3 hours, let alone just a few blurbs on a podcast. So yes, there are exceptions, but you should probably not try them if you're listening to
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Being
So
forceful with somebody.
so let me use a real life scenario here. Like I think for the people listening, and I know we had a good conversation about it weeks ago, and it was a case of again just like somebody who just has a condition that they're living with, and and something changed, like not like a permanent change that anybody knew of, just it was one of those things where something was different that had never happened before, again like in what's already like a stressful situation. um and then as a result, like they were pretty much out of it, like when this happened, like they couldn't really be involved, but there were two caregivers present, and one was trying to be like, this is new, that doesn't mean it's bad, with like that this could be a good thing, whereas the other caregiver had the opposite approach. This is new, this could mean that this is like progressing negatively, we like this is awful, and it created that type of that type, not conflict, but just that type of like butting against each other. And in both cases it was the person caring for that person, like, and neither one of these was trying to do anything, they just had totally different reactions to the change that was happening. um and so in those situations, like that's when I get really, to me, because that's the type of thing I see a lot or hear a lot, is those types of things, is almost always people, like, because you are actually involved with these situations more than I am hands on. I tend to hear about, not yours, but I tend to hear about situations like this a lot more, and it's
Yeah,
usually
you're a coach. You're a pseudo therapist. There's some
exactly.
professions that just hear
So
these things.
so
Yeah,
usually what I pick up is somebody telling me what's happened, and it's always got that one side of the story feel. It's like
yeah.
there's another side, but just like again, like both people have the same aim of caring for somebody. It's just their different perspectives and how they kind of are butting heads with it.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying that to be aware of what part of that, because I feel like there's something useful to extract from that, but I'm not sure of
Yeah, it's
what.
almost like understanding at what point in a situation like that you should maybe pull back. I think that's because I feel like that's it in both cases. That you had two people with two different reactions, both going like 100% at it, because that's what they were living and experiencing. So it's like, where in that do you kind of work on realizing that the other person probably has something, like there's something what the other person is saying too. It's in the moment, so it's that much harder.
Yeah, yeah. So let me turn that into a usable bullet point, because now I see what you're saying. Um, because of the way human brains work, we easily get into scripts and habits, and just we do things a certain way, and that's the way it is. And caregiving is a somewhat unique situation where scripts are oftentimes bad. So if you're on the script of something new has happened and therefore that means everything is more awful, that actually could be true, but not challenging that is really not a good idea. Uh, and or being on the opposite script of uh, that something new happened and but that's fine because we've overcome everything else before, so no need to worry or anything. That can be its own kind of troublesome. So it sounds like what you're saying is be a little bit aware of what script you're operating on, and don't accidentally stay on it without any challenging of it, questioning of it, paying attention to kind of what you are doing automatically. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yep. It's basically it's trying to help people and realize that, like, especially in those situations where everybody has the same like ideal goal in mind, aka giving this person good care, that just to basically listen to each other and really respect what each other is
Mhm.
saying and feeling, um, because there's going to be merit on both sides, on every side. I feel like with that, and again, like
Well, often anyway. Sometimes people are just
right,
flat
yeah,
wrong, but often.
yeah, you're gonna always gonna have like yeah outliers, um, but at least it's coming from the same from everybody's just getting their own interpretation of what they're seeing, and then but then also when it comes to actually what message are you guys giving to the person being cared for, that that is the most important thing in this situation. So it's like just to try to not tip the scales over too much one way or the other.
Yeah.
What that actually leads me to the next thing, because I was talking about kind of almost caregiver again, not conflict, just differences in
Oh no, I
caregiver.
think that's conflict. That's a fine word
Absolutely.
for what you're describing.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. Not malicious conflict. There we go. I forget the conflict has a not always negative connotation. So,
Yeah, just
um,
accidental.
yeah. So, but then looking at what what the people being cared for are actually going through, whether we're talking single caregiver or not. Um, what are differences you believe, or the things that can help people in both situations of a more temporary caregiving situation? Like you mentioned, someone maybe had surgery, something like that, just needs a road to recovery. Things that can help those people give better care or without losing themselves, and people who are looking at more just lifelong conditions.
So back to the first one, that will always be the first one. No matter what, you must take care of yourself. If you ruin yourself, you cannot give good care. But the nice thing about short-term stuff is most human beings can adapt reasonably well to short-term suffering. So even if you really don't do well in the caregiver role, and even if you don't take to it easily, most people can navigate that short term reasonably well. The challenge will often be just not be doing it so compassionlessly that you damage the relationship. But in a way, there's almost not a ton of desperately important advice to give because since humans are designed to deal with short term suffering, uh, that one's okay. The long term is where I would basically take all of my advice and just shove it in the long term bucket.
Okay.
Uh, and that's where it becomes much more important to both take care of yourself, but also make sure that you can access compassion for whom you are caring. Uh, and if that necessitates you've got to like get counseling related help, then fine. But one of the things that often happens is people will lose compassion for the person they're caring for, not only through their own bad self-care, but because some things just are hard for us to imagine being. One of the easiest ones I can go to, somebody caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah.
That is such a mess because humans have difficulty with seeing through intermittent reinforcement. What happens to a lot of people in those scenarios is the old person that they used to know will shine through for 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes, and they'll see that person be present, and then they'll disappear again for a day, a week, a month, God only knows how long. And so it's hard for the human brain to imagine uh, that they're basically dealing with two separate people. They're dealing with the old person who shows up every now and again that they used to know and love and was wonderful, and then they have this other personality wearing the same face. And it's hard for them to imagine they're dealing with two different people. And it's, if you lose access to that, well, what story do you start telling yourself? You start telling yourself about how this is such a mean person. Why are you so mean now? Or, I told you this 12 times. Why can't you just remember it? And it starts to very easily shift into a compassionless place, accidentally, not because somebody's being careless, but it's hard for us to imagine that. And the same goes for almost any long-term care situation. Uh, Certainly more for invisible problems like dementia, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injuries, anything that doesn't come with like a clear physical indicator. But even the other ones, it's hard to maintain compassion. So whatever is necessary to maintain compassion is absolutely key. Uh, self-care, going to therapy, like really trying to remember, why are you caring for this person in the first place? If I'm ever in a situation where I have to care for my parents, I hope that the thing I will be able to do is continue to have access to the fact that, they gave me so far a terrific 40 years. And one of the reasons I want to have compassion for that is paying that back, even if they lose their capacities. So having something in the front of your mind to help you have that compassion is going to be essential. And the last thing for long term, because this is where people drop the ball so easily. Get support, and I don't mean like therapy support. I mean like get other people to help.
Yes.
We in America, oh my gosh, we love independence. We love the idea we can do it all on our own. And boy, I wish I could just like personify that as an idea so that I could like just throw it off a cliff. Uh, that is one of the most destructive things caregivers get into is they want to do it all themselves. Absolutely, if you're doing long-term caregiving, you should have your friends help. You should have your other family help. If you have a love partner and they're willing, you should have them help. Any willing hands. If you are fortunate enough to be in a situation where you can pay for help, you should absolutely be writing a check. Because no matter what, this is a heavy, heavy thing to deal with, even in a short-term scenario. Long-term, if you're not getting help, I promise you burn out. I promise that will happen. So far, I have never seen an exception to that rule.
Your last piece hit two of the things I had here. This is so big. I mean, one of them is yes, like I really want to re-emphasize um the possibility like having other people help, but like you said, if you're able to and you have the means, write checks because caring is long-term, lifelong care is, I mean, if it gets to a certain level, it's definitely not cheap. Um, but getting some help might not be too bad. I mean, I know you and I were talking about like, how you might be able to say get a ride, help the person get a ride from A to B for 4 hours for 20 to $40 an hour, maybe, little things like that that can help take the stress away or the responsibility for even a little bit. Running errands, house care, stuff like that. It doesn't have to be the more expensive long-term medical care that we're thinking about. Getting like even quote unquote lower level care can be a tremendous help by easing the amount of stuff you have to worry about. And they said that makes just less stress as a whole there. And then another one that you put is I was thinking like so often, we think about motivation, like motivation is fleeting. Good intentions are almost the same way when I think about that. Not that the good intentions go away, but but keeping them in the forefront of your mind. Like I feel like early on, you're like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to help this person. I'm going to make sure, I'm here for them. But just like you said, if that's a long term rest of their life scenario, that is probably going to get eroded to some degree, and you're just not going to think about it because you're tired. When you're tired, you might start feeling more resentful. things
That's I've never thought of it in precisely those words, but that's something desperately insightful that you have said here. And so I want to use it to modify the thing that I just said. Get help, and if you are getting volunteer help, non-paid help from friends, family, spouses, etc., rotate your helpers.
Yes.
Now that you have said that, I immediately spot that one of the things that happens often is, let's say we have somebody caring for their parent, and the spouse basically getting drawn into it by nature of that. If you lean on the spouse too hard, they lose their compassion. But if you rotate who's helping you with stuff, you buy a lot more time. So I'm going to double down now on my get help, because if you're getting help and having other people assist you, you are not running out of compassion nearly so quickly. And also, if you rotate your helpers, you don't burn any of them out, and they stay fresh. So matter of fact, I feel like that statement you just said, good intentions are fleeting. Either we're doing a podcast on that at some point, or I'm doing a video on that on my own channel, or we're doing something with that, because that's gold.
Awesome. I liked it too. But yeah, so the idea came across listening to your points. And that one more that I want to like, one thing that I thought about is also so big when you were mentioning making sure you don't become compassionless in it is, again, thinking about the person actually getting the care. And this is, this is applicable for short term a little bit, but huge for long term is you got to also think about that person's dignity. Like they're almost certainly going to have some issue of, internal strife, feeling like they're losing their own dignity, because if nothing else, because they can't perform the way they used to. Like, I don't know a single person who gets help who doesn't feel that, who doesn't, when they open up anyway, bring that up. Like, I can't do the things I used to, something like that. And like you said, in some conditions might just make that even worse, or some situations they might find themselves in where you have to help them with something more personal and necessary. Um, well, like all those things like really hurt what we have formed as dignity, which I don't even really know. Like, I know what dignity is, but I have never, I never thought about where it even comes from or what it does.
Uh,
So
to,
I
to,
really,
to be honest, you could take dignity and you could substitute it for like the feeling of empowerment. Oftentimes we
yeah.
use those very interchangeably. The more we feel disempowered, the more we feel we have lost our dignity in some form or fashion.
So that's a specific circumstance I'd actually love to hear on before, closing it, is just like when when we're caring for somebody, we might be doing something that would be considered a little quote unquote less dignified.
Mhm.
I don't know, like bathing somebody who up
Yeah.
until now always could, those are big ones, or helping them use the bathroom. Those are physical ones, but there's tons of mental ones as well, like, or things like that. Like, people can no longer handle their finances or whatever, just whatever it might be. Things like that. Like, what are some ways that as the caregiver we might be able to, again, like navigate that a little bit better?
Number one, and maybe it's important enough to be the only point worth discussing. Uh, Treat all of it like it's not a big deal.
Huge. Yes.
Because, like, as soon as you even hint that it's a big deal, like, oh my gosh, um, I was incapacitated for a few days with that nerve pain thing. I wish somebody would have kept count how damn many times I apologized to my wife that she had to, like, even just to help me around. I mean, it had to have been over the course of that week, hundreds. Uh, Over the course of, I don't know how long, months, years. How easy is it going to be to how good gracious, I can't talk now. How easy is it going to be for that person to view themselves as a burden? So you start hinting that this stuff is a big deal. It's really going to land on them like just a knife in the heart. So you got to bathe somebody, you got to clean them up after going to the bathroom. You basically treat it with exactly the same face and emotional output as you would if you were just raking the leaves or putting gas in the car. Like, it's just a thing that's happening right now, and there's no point in treating it like it's any kind of a huge deal.
Man, that is so simple and so spot on. It's like
But the consistency is going to be hard, because boy, that first time you just had a bad day and you're worn out and you're getting compassion fatigued, and they're like, hey, can you bring me, something from the fridge? And you do that. Oh, now you have just treated it like it's a big deal,
Yep.
accidentally, and not meaning to. So realistically, you are going to fail at this, but you just fail as little as often, or as little as possible, and you on those moments you treat it like a big deal. You catch yourself as quickly as possible and get the hell out of it. But the thing I'm proposing is not possible. You will not be able to treat it like it's not a big deal forever and always, because human
Right.
beings just ain't that way.
Yep. Yeah, that's so good, man. Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I'd say there's about 700 things I want to add, but for the purpose of making it usable and distillable, I think I will just summarize my bullet points and be happy with where we're at.
Well, users note, we did have a quick powwow before starting about not letting this be 3 hours long.
Yeah. We realized we kind of bit off a huge thing, and we could easily talk about this forever. So, summary: if you do literally nothing else that has been suggested, take care of yourself. That is going to enhance your caregiving. If you forget everything else, you must do that, and it is not optional. It is not a luxury. It is not a reward. It is a mandatory part of your job as a caregiver to keep yourself fresh and okay and healthy, because you cannot give good care otherwise. So take care of yourself. Do your best to be in touch with your scripts, not getting too into that everything is awful, not getting too into everything's fine, but having that forward to just kind of not get stuck in those scripts, and have as much compassion as possible. You got to rotate yourself in and out as a caregiver to the extent possible. You got to get help. You got to pay for help if you need to. You got to get volunteer help. It is not wrong, and it is not weakness to get help. For heaven's sake. Yeah, I mean, we would never do this in a sport, right? Like even all of the best players of all time, we rotate them out of the game sometimes. You got to rotate out of this game, because this game lasts years, and it is way harder than any sport, and so you must get assistance. Period. End of story.
So good, brother. Good stuff. All right, everybody. Hope this definitely helps somebody in your life out, yourself or others. We'll be back again with another episode, another topic here in a couple of weeks. Until then, take care. See you, everybody.
Yo.